Once again, we welcome you to Moving Forward with Young Voices. Happy to welcome a new contributor this week. This is his first time joining us on the show. His name is Garrett W. Fulce. And Garrett, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me today.
And I'm sorry to ask you this after actually saying your name. Did I pronounce it correctly?
Yes, you nailed it the
Okay.
first time, which is better than most.
So, since this is our first time getting acquainted with you, take just a moment. Tell me a little bit about your background, who you are, and what you do.
Sure. I'm based in Sugar Land, Texas. Been in Texas. I'm seventh generation Texan. Did some time in DC earlier in my career. I've been writing for about 10 years on and off for different clients. Just decided to finally get my voice out there. I wanted to finally speak for myself, and found the Young Voices program, and has been a great opportunity. I own a public affairs firm here in the Sugar Land area in the Houston area that focuses on Texas politics for the most part, but helps with any client anywhere.
Well, we've got a very timely subject to discuss today, and unfortunately, it's based in a unprecedented kind of tragedy that took place just a little over a month ago, and that was, of course, the Hill Country flooding that happened over the Independence Day weekend. I'm looking at an article in the Houston Chronicle. This is one that you wrote. The title: "Want Accountability? Let Disaster Victims Sue Texas." Now, I want to first of all say, um, let's talk about the disaster itself. I know that there's lots of questions that follow. There what 130 people that
Yeah.
ultimately lost their lives. What are the questions that are being asked regarding authorities in Texas who have the responsibility for either flood management or flood warnings?
Well, that's a great question. Texas has a part-time legislature. So session ended at the end of May, or June 2nd. The governor has the ability to call the legislature back into session, and had already announced that he was going to do that, but hadn't set the parameters when the flooding occurred. So that pushed it back a little bit because that was obviously added to the call. And right now there's several different things working through the legislature. But on a separate issue, the Democrats have broke quorum, so there's nothing happening right now in Austin. So there's been lots of hearings, both in the Kerrville area and in Austin. Several hours of painstaking testimony from victims who were impacted directly, who are people who lost lives, lost family members, and that some people who were both victims of the actual flood and lost family members, which are some of the more harrowing stories. So there's a lot of discussion on why wasn't there a flood alert system? Why didn't people hear the National Weather Service alerts that went out about an hour before the flooding really hit up? Because the river rose 30 feet in like an hour and a half. Like it was just a tremendous amount of water in a very short amount of time. So, what sort of ways are there in the future? Like why were there so many people close to the river in the floodplain, et cetera? So trying to work out all these questions. But one of the things I touch on in my article is that they've done studies on this. You said it was unprecedented, but it really wasn't. There was a similar flood in the 80s. There was one in 1930s. This happens in the Texas Hill Country because of its geology, because of its, whatever else. A lot of water, whenever these tropical storms from the Pacific or the Atlantic stall over Texas, which is possible because of just general weather patterns outside of everything else, they dump all their water. And they knew that this could be a problem because it's been a problem in the past. It just happened on a holiday weekend at night, and despite all the cell phones in the world, a lot of people didn't hear the call.
I'm not trying to give people in positions of responsibility a pass on this, but
Of course.
is there ever an instance where it's just like, look, nature can do some hugely unpredictable things, and I don't know, is it unrealistic to expect that we could craft a perfect enough plan to really keep people safe, given that we don't know exactly what nature might do?
I think that's a great question, but I think it one of the things I've been looking at is how do you flip the incentive structure? Because right now, like where politicians never have the impetus to do something proactive, they always have to be reactive. So let me put that more simply. In this situation, it made more sense for the Kerrville County, sorry, not Kerrville, the Kerr County Commissioners Court to reinvest in their youth center, which is a big community area where a lot of actual um, disaster response, like warming center type stuff was done after the floods. They put $4 million into that, but they didn't put $1 million into the siren system, which they had done the blueprints for, they'd done all the studies for, and everything else. It makes more sense to do that, and if there's no issue down the line where they could have to pay, tens of millions of something down, whatever the case may be, because of a disaster happened. It's if you have this sort of thing, and it would be capped. And I propose that you cap it, so it wouldn't be some crazy buffet for trial attorneys. But
Mhm.
nevertheless, if you have that sort of structure in place, politicians then have to keep in mind that that's on the hook too whenever they're making those decisions on money that goes towards roads or towards whatever else. It makes those decisions easier for them to sell to voters.
Talk to me about sovereign immunity. I know you mentioned this in your article, and you mentioned this is one of the obstacles that keeps people from being able to sue government.
Yeah, so there's a doctrine of sovereign immunity, which is a common law doctrine that echoes through the Constitution itself, plus one of the amendments, I think the 11th Amendment, because there was one of the first court cases that was something I wrote as a non-attorney. It was fascinating to me. But so it's existed for a long time, and basically the state can't be sued, but it can allow itself to be sued. So in Texas, there's the Texas Tort Claims Act, which basically was designed for if you got into a car accident with a school bus and it was the school bus's fault, there was no sovereign immunity in that case, or it was capped, or whatever else you could have that sort of thing happen. Uh, in the last legislative session, they've pierced that veil even further in cases of child abuse by school officials or by other governmental entities, primarily schools because of the context. So basically, if there's no more get out of jail free card if you were negligent in your hiring practices, if you didn't report things properly, if you should have known, there you don't have that governmental protection any longer. And in those situations they capped the fees at $500,000. So Texas is already exploring this as an option, and it's like I mentioned before, when you do this outside of all the ideas that a government might have, you end up having the ideas of you're going to have to get an insurance policy. That's how the and school districts are approaching this. They school policies. Well, the insurance company is going to say you're not, you can't have insurance or whatever else, or your premiums are going to be way higher if you don't implement certain steps along the lines. Oh, sorry, along the way. So that's the way I theorize that it would end up working, end up putting it on that private side things. But we're talking about governmental entities. They own the rivers in Texas. These are if the government wants to own the river, which they do, then if just like if something were to happen on my property or if my tree limb falls on my neighbor's house, I'm responsible for that. The government, regardless of whether or not they profit from the tax revenue, from the tourism revenue, all of that. So, in my view, I think that they should have some skin in the game when it comes to those things, killing people.
There's a wonderful sentence here in your article about if we want to prevent total devastation for the next flood or fire or storm surge and encourage adequate protection and warning, you say we need fewer bailouts and more consequences.
Yeah.
Can you take a minute and we have less than a minute, but just elaborate
Yeah.
on that if you would for about 30 seconds.
Well, I think the consequences are just like I mentioned earlier, are the lawsuits, are the possibilities that there's going to be some skin in the game. Like if you don't act, it's kind of the trolley problem in reverse, I guess, is if you don't pull the lever, you're going to end up paying the cost down the line.
Fascinating. Um, let's take a moment here to let people know about where they can find you on social media. I understand you also host a podcast yourself.
Mhm.
If people would like to find and subscribe to that.
Yeah, so I host a Texas politics podcast called the Seeing Red Podcast. You can find it on YouTube and on X at the Seeing Red Pod, and then my personal social media is at GW Fulce on Twitter X, where I spend most of my time.
Okay, Garrett, it's wonderful to meet you, and I'm just sorry that the time went so quickly. I have so many more questions. Again, talking with Garrett W. Fulce. He is a Young Voices contributor. Thank you so much, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Thank you. Have a great one.
And And we are back. This is Moving Forward with Young Voices. Happy to welcome back to the program Agustina Vergara Cid. She is joining us actually from Argentina today. How are you?
I'm good, Brian. Thank you so much for having me again.
It's always a pleasure to talk with you, but I think this is an especially timely conversation because right now immigration is really, on the forefront of a lot of people's thinking, and you have skin in the game. You have a very interesting tale to tell about your own immigration and naturalization story. Where would you like to begin to talk about the journey that you have just recently been through?
Well, I think one thing that is like one of the reasons I highlight my own story is because I'm a person who was fortunate enough to be able to immigrate to America legally, which the vast majority of people aren't able to do because of how restrictive our immigration system is. But I was able to do it, and I followed every single rule, never did anything, to not respect the law. So I respected every single rule, followed everything, had a lawyer, everything. And even then, I was put through essentially rings of fire to be able to immigrate legally. And some of the things that happened to me prompted by these, honestly, frankly, often ridiculous regulations that really did traumatize me forever. Like for what I told you were, you know, I wrote an article recently for Young Voices where I explain how because of immigration regulations I wasn't able to come back to Argentina to see my father before he died, and these sort of things are things that happen to legal immigrants every single day, and not a lot of people talk about it. So that's part of what I try to do with sharing my story.
I thought it was fascinating in your article how you talk about the obstacles. And this was an 8-year journey. It wasn't just, yeah, earlier this year I decided I was going to become a citizen. You have been after this for a long, long time. And you talk about how the obstacles of that journey, some of them left you scarred, but you would do it again. In fact, you say you would choose it 1,000 times over. And I'm just going to simply ask, why?
Well, it's a little hard sometimes to say, like, well, I would choose to go through that trauma again, like that sort of thing. It's like a little, complex to think about what that would look like and everything. But um, honestly, yeah. So I became a citizen last month in July, the July 3rd, actually. So the July 4th was my first day as a American, like formally an American. And I'm still to this day very, very emotional about it because I love this country so deeply. And since I was a little girl, literally 4 years old, I was kind of like obsessed with America. And I was kind of like an American way before I came here for the first time to visit and all of that. So and then like later on in life I really studied the founding principles of this country. I studied history. I studied the political philosophy behind the American founding, and I truly deeply admire those values. So to me, being an American and living here and being able to enjoy these freedoms that only this country can afford is truly an honor. And to be able not only just to live here like as an immigrant, like as a permanent resident or anything, but to be a citizen and be able to actively participate in the future of this country is something that is just absolutely precious to me.
Agustina, it seems like it's human nature for us to take things for granted. And I'm speaking particularly of people who have grown up as American citizens their whole life. We see a lot of reasons as we look around, and you actually hear a lot of people complaining. I think this is very helpful to hear through the eyes of someone who's had to take a long, difficult journey to become a citizen, to remember that there are things that are still very much worth celebrating in this nation. And I'd like to ask you, help us remember what are the things that are worthwhile and um, good about this nation.
Yeah, I'll say something to the effect, people take it for granted. I remember once I was talking to someone, and this person was very happy that I was here, but I was also saying, oh, America is such a dumpster fire, and like talking, like speaking against America. And I actually took offense to it because I did so much to be able to be here. And I'm not an idiot, like so to speak. I didn't like leave everything behind and went through everything I went through just to come to a dumpster fire. I came to a great and incredible and unique in human history, country, um, which affords freedoms that nowhere else in the world are enjoyed. And not only that, but it was the only country that was founded on the principles of individual freedom, of individualism, right? So it's such a rare thing that America exists, and it's this product of the whole Enlightenment. It's like the culmination of the Enlightenment, and that might sound a little abstract about it, but every single freedom that we enjoyed, our Constitution, the rights that we enjoy, limited government, all of that is an invention of America. And so it's I take offense when people sometimes speak ill of America. And of course there's a lot of things wrong with America and have been historically wrong with America, and I think that particularly in this moment in history we're going through a lot as a country, and a lot of things that are absolutely wrong and even evil. But even then, those things are a consequence of the betrayal of our founding values. And so we need to go back to those values, and we need to celebrate those values, and rein in the people that don't want to do that.
There's a line in this article that just really stuck out to me, and that is, there are people who are American on everything but paper, even before having ever set foot on these shores. And I'll confess, I get frustrated with sometimes the political theater and the drama that seems to never end coming out of Washington, D.C. But I need to be reminded sometimes that there is something larger here than just the political system in Washington, D.C. In fact, if I could ask you, um, when we step away from the politics, what are some of the other qualities of America that make it such a desirable place for people all over the world?
There are a lot of things, honestly, but one thing that really kind of like attracts me to America is sort of this individualism. And some people use individualism as as an insult or something negative. I think individualism is actually good. It's actually really good. And America is a country founded on this. And that means that everyone knows, or should know, and many Americans even like implicitly sort of know, that they have a right to pursue their own happiness, like the Declaration says, right? And they mind their own business and they try to do what's best for them. And part of what that means is, building a life around a productive purpose, which is work. And you know how the Europeans like to make fun of Americans? Oh, Americans live to work, blah, blah, blah. Well, actually, of course, there's a limit to how much you should work to be healthy and everything. But building your life around a productive purpose is something that is actually really, really good. And I love to see Americans, creating that value and being so into creating value. And that's one of the things that I think is really unique to America. And I really, appreciate it. And that's one of the things that I like the most about it.
I'm looking at the part in your article where you talk about your father passing away, and we've got a little over a minute left here. But talk to me a little bit about what was the legal reason that you could not return to Argentina to be with him before the end of his life. What would have happened had you gone back?
Yeah, so essentially, my dad got really, really sick while I was in the United States. It's a thing called adjustment of status, which is when you are on a visa and you're adjusting status, like you're transferring to, for instance, permanent residency. Uh, the law does not allow you to exit the country, because if you do, you cannot get back in, or your visa, your application will be considered abandoned. So essentially, I had to have a conversation with my dad. I was ready to go back, but he said, "Don't come back, because if you come back, all your dreams of being in America, of building a life there, since you were 4 years old, these dreams will be destroyed." So that's the reason that I couldn't see my dad. And regulations like that are all over our immigration system.
I'm so sorry that you had to go through that experience, but I appreciate you sharing it. And I think it illustrates the depth of obstacles people are willing to face to become a member of, or to become a citizen of the United States. And I have to ask this, we've only got about 30 seconds left here, but how did it feel to take the oath of citizenship? How did those words feel as you spoke them?
I could start crying right now, but I'll tell you, this is anyone who wants to look at this. I actually have the video of my oath on Twitter. I started okay, and then when the part of comes that he says, I will, defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, I just lost it and started sobbing, and I could barely finish the oath, because that to me is so meaningful to pledge my support forever to this country that I love so deeply, and like so for such deep reasons. It's just something that really moves me to tears, literally.
Agustina Vergara Cid, thank you so much for sharing your story and being our guest today.
Thank you so much, Ryan.
Welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. Hey, we are happy to welcome Lora Karch back to the program. Lora is she is not only a Young Voices contributor, but Lora, I understand you've recently taken on kind of a new title to your position. Tell me a little bit about that.
So I recently I'm continuing with Young Voices as their Middle East History and Peace Fellow, or one of their fellows. So very excited.
What does that entail? What's the responsibility of that assignment?
Well, so now I get to write about the Middle East with a nice fancy title. So I basically get to continue writing about what I'm writing about, and I'm so grateful for the program and having a great time. So
What a shame that nothing interesting ever seems to happen in the Middle East. Okay, I'm kidding, but that's quite a beat to have to cover. I'm looking at an article you wrote for the Times of Israel about speak softly and carry a B2. And let's, first of all, can I get you to kind of summarize? There's been so much that has happened just this year in the Middle East. And I'm talking particularly between Israel and Iran. There are other players as well, but that's been one of the big ones. Where do we stand right now? I don't think I can say with confidence that I really know where we are.
right, definitely lots has happened over the course of, I would say, the last 2, 3 months. So I'll try to make it brief. The US and Iran were having peace talks over their nuclear power program over May and June. There was no real progress. It coincided with the same time that Trump made his Gulf trip to Saudi, Qatar, and the UAE, where he announced the removal of the Syria sanctions. So once Iran caught wind of that, they actually communicated interest in having a deal over their nuclear program for tariff relief similar to that of Syria. But there was no real response from the US. And then, of course, on June 13th was when Israel launched its preemptive attack on some nuclear and military sites, including getting rid of some major generals and top military elite heads of the Revolutionary Guard. So that really put a dent in their forces. Of course, Iran retaliated with a wave of missiles and drone attacks targeting Israeli civilian cities, and at the same time warned the US not to involve itself militarily, which of course Trump responded to that with, we'll decide over the next few weeks whether or not we'll get involved, which was a bluff, because a couple of days after that, he launched Operation Midnight Hammer, which entails the B-2 strikes on Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. It included, I believe, 14 bunker bombs and over 24 Tomahawk missiles with U.S. Navy support. So it was a very strong response to which the U.S. government was in alignment. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, we had the Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Director of National Intelligence, all say that it was a giant success. And then Trump came out and said, okay, that was it. I'm not interested in firing anything more. And it did allow Iran, I would say, to save face and retaliate by firing missiles at the US base in Qatar, to which fortunately there were no casualties reported. And then since then, there's been a ceasefire that was brokered largely due to the US and Qatar diplomatic interventions. But I would say today, the fight has moved into cyber warfare, where Iran and Israel are reportedly attacking each other via the internet.
Wow. There was a part in your article about deception over diplomacy, and I kind of wanted to revisit that because I know diplomacy. Who was it? Will Rogers, I think, talked about diplomacy is, the art of saying nice doggy while you're picking up a rock, something like that. It's not about being helpless, but it's about, maybe buying yourself some time. Did the U.S. engage in, was it diplomacy? Was it a mixture of diplomacy and deception that gave them time to carry out Operation Midnight Hammer?
I would say, in the beginning, it was a mix of credible talks, back and forth visits. And, I do agree with you in that the foundation of US diplomacy is the implicit trust of upholding our word, as the world's superpower. And the covert force that came in during these peace talks was what I think destroyed the destroyed the credibility of any US diplomatic talks in the future. It did give us a short-term win with destroying the nuclear facilities. But I do argue in my piece that it turned it into long-term losses in which an already pissed off Iran now doesn't trust the US or anything it says. It breeds more animosity, and in some ways it kind of fortifies the oppressive regime's position, with its own civilians.
And okay, I'm going to pose this question. I'm not asking you to please solve the peace problem there between, Iran and Israel, but um, did it have its intended effect? I mean, basically, does Iran need to trust us if we have the capability of, subduing them or conquering them or destroying their weapons programs? Why would we need their trust, I guess is what I'm asking.
Right. So I wouldn't say that we have to prioritize Iranian trust in the US, but I would say that the public display of deception certainly doesn't encourage our other allies or potential adversaries to trust us in any future negotiations. So, this, in my opinion, it does undermine every other agreement we've ever made or make moving forward. Of course, it does depend on how we move forward with Iran. But I think as of now, Iran is in a position where it expects deception instead of, taking Trump's word when he says, I'm not interested in further bombing, and things like that.
Is the temperature of the conflict between Iran and Israel has that cooled somewhat, or are they still in a very heightened state of animosity toward one another?
So the last that was reported was that Iran is now hiding its nuclear scientists in bunkers as a protective measure. But it did I believe it was this past Saturday. It went on with its deputy foreign minister for political affairs told Japan's news that they were ready to accept some limitations on their nuclear program in return for sanction removal. So there is movement there. Maybe the Israeli and Iranian cyber warfare is, paying off in that respect. But it did say that zero enrichment was non-negotiable to completely end the uranium enrichment, but they are willing to make a compromise. So hopefully that does lead to an agreement. That way the region would kind of cool down for a bit, which, I'm not sure that's the most realistic statement, but I'm idealistic in when I say I do hope things cool down.
No, that idealism's the exact reason I asked that question too. I want to see peace. And I guess let me ask you this question. We've got about a minute or so left here. None of us really knows where it goes from here. In your opinion, though, did the U.S. strikes on the Iranian nuclear facilities in those 3 locations, did it accomplish something that slows the likelihood of greater conflict, or just defer it to a later time?
So, our administration did come out and say that it did buy us some time, 6 months or so, with the amount of destruction that we gave it. But, and a month's delay is still very good, I would say, but it doesn't bring lasting security in the region in terms of, our US bases in the Middle East. I do believe that only diplomacy and honest negotiations bring that long-term, trusting, lasting security. So the delays do matter, but they have to be balanced against what the diplomatic cost was in the deception that we did with the V2 attacks. And, if the strike buys months, it may cost us years of the negotiation. So it might just lengthen our negotiations with Iran even further because the trust foundation is now gone.
Again, we are talking with Lora Karch. She is a Middle East History and Peace Fellow at Young Voices. Lora, where can people find your work and follow you on social media?
I'm on Twitter, now called X, at my first and last name, Lora Karch. And I'm also a Times of Israel blogger now. So
Thank you so much for your time today.
thank you.
And we are back. This is our fourth and final segment today on Moving Forward with Young Voices. Hey, I am happy to welcome Simon Laird to the program. He is a Young Voices contributor. Simon, I would appreciate it if you take just a moment. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So I just joined the Young Voices program a couple months ago. I've been building my writing presence on Substack for the past year and a half, and I just published my first piece with Young Voices recently about sports betting. So sports betting has become a big thing in recent years, and that's actually because it was recently legalized. For a long time, online sports betting was illegal, and then the Supreme Court struck that down in 2018. So since then, it's become an explosive industry, which is a good thing. That's something I think we support as libertarians. But betting was banned for a reason, and it was at Chesterton's fence. And now that it's been torn down, there are a few problems arising. So bankruptcy rates, especially among young men, have risen in states that have legalized sports betting apps. There was a study from 2024 which actually said the bankruptcy rates have risen by 28% in the states that have legalized this. And of course, there's going to be a political backlash to that. So there's already legislation in the federal Congress to crack down on gambling in ways that really don't have a lot to do with fighting gambling addiction. It seems like a power grab by Congress. But also, there have been some state legislatures where legislators have introduced bills to repeal their legalization of sports betting. Because the Supreme Court struck down that federal prohibition on it, it's now a state-by-state issue. I believe there are 18 states where it is still illegal and legal in the other 32.
I will admit, I've never participated in, a
Me neither.
sports betting app. I've never done online gambling, but I sure see a lot of ads cropping up on my X or Twitter feed.
Yes.
So I know it must be a thing. How big an industry is this?
I don't know. It's in the billions of dollars and it's growing very fast. So what I was writing about in my article is that because there are these negative effects, I have a proposed pro-liberty suggestion. So my suggestion is that I think that these platforms like FanDuel and DraftKings should provide a stop button in the top left of the screen. And I think when you click on the stop button, it should say, ban me from this website for 3 days or 30 days or 60 days or however long you want to ban yourself for. And I think this gives people a way to tie their hands, like from the ancient Greek story about Odysseus going through the straits with the sirens. He tied his hands to the mast. I think that it's as libertarians, we don't want to totally ban this activity that's fun for a lot of people. But there are also people who seem to have a real problem. It seems like, if someone's getting divorced or going bankrupt because of this, that is a problem for them. And they should have the opportunity to tie their hands so they don't end up having bad things happen to them.
Actually, that sounds like a very reasonable proposal to me. I mean, it acknowledges some of the negative things that come along with the fun of sports betting, but rather than outsourcing responsibility to government,
right?
So you enforce this and protect me from my bad behavior or addictive behavior, as the case may be. It puts at least a portion of that responsibility back on the shoulders of the person themselves. At least that's how I read that.
That's how I think of it as well. And actually, I'm not the first person to have an idea like this. There are many states, actually maybe even be most states, have things called voluntary self-exclusion programs for gambling. So you can go to some office in the state government and fill out some paperwork that says, I want to be banned from gambling for 1 year, for example. And then if you try to go into a casino in that state, you're supposed to be excluded. You show your ID and then they check the list and you see you wanted to be excluded, so we're not letting you in the casino. So I think that's a great option. The problem, though, is that most people just don't know those programs exist. I'm guessing you didn't know it. I didn't know it before I wrote this article. There was a study from 2023 which found that only 11% of gamblers are aware of these voluntary self-exclusion programs. So there needs to be some. My stop sign proposal would be more obvious to everyone using that site. And I think we all need to be aware of the laws if we're going to benefit from them.
Is there any kind of data that would help us better understand how likely is a gambler to recognize, oh boy, this is, I've got to put the brakes on. And I'm saying that from the standpoint, most of the time it seems like with addictive behavior, people can find an excuse. Are we seeing some positive, indicators that, people would act responsibly given, an off ramp, if you will, from the app?
We
Even
actually don't have
temporary?
that data yet. But I think that creating something like the stop sign button one of the benefits is that we would get that data, because then we would have the perfect data set. We would have all of the metadata from the website, where we would see how people were behaving before the stop sign button was implemented, and then how people behaved afterwards. So the answer is we don't have that data right now, but it's something we would find out if this were to be implemented.
And are there other applications for which this would also, you know, be usable?
I
For
would say
instance,
yes. I think that this would be my preferred solution to all kinds of vice. Like, I think you should be able to open a meth shop. But I do think that if someone tells you, I'm getting addicted, don't sell me any more meth, I do think you should honor that and not become part of the problem. So I don't think we're going to see total drug legalization anytime soon. But I personally would like to see something like the stop sign button for pornography websites, maybe social media websites, and some online video games I think are addictive for some people. There's the question of whether these sites would be required to do that by law or whether they would do it voluntarily. Personally, I would have no problem making a law to require gambling websites and maybe pornography websites to do that. Maybe you would feel differently. But even if you don't want a law to do it, I think it is in the interest of these companies to provide that stop sign button, because they will create political backlash regardless. For example, we've seen a lot of states legalize online sports betting since the Supreme Court allowed them to do that in 2018. But just in the last year, 6 states have filed legislation to reverse that legalization because of course, these concerns about increased divorce rates and increased bankruptcy rates. And the federal legislation, this is called the Federal Safe Bet Act. It's from Paul Tonko, Democrat of New York, and Richard Blumenthal, Democrat of Connecticut. This imposes a bunch of restrictions on sports betting that have nothing to do with gambling addiction. So, for example, it forbids people from making what are called proposition bets. This is a bet where you bet that some particular thing will happen in a game, like this particular player will score 2 touchdowns, which distinguishes it from a bet on whether the whole team will win or lose. So there's going to be political backlash anyway, and that's going to become an excuse for very wide-ranging regulation. I think it would be in the interest of these companies to provide the very small and sweet opt-out method by providing a stop sign button so that people can tie their hands.
by the way, something that you did in your article that I really appreciated is you compare the word addiction with the old-fashioned term vice. And
Yes.
I appreciated that, because I know the meaning of words shifts over time, and sometimes we use euphemisms because they're gentler and easier. But I like that you showed those are really kind of equivalent terms, in the sense that mistakes people make as they are pursuing their happiness.
Right. Yes, I always try to connect to old-timey language, because I think it gives you it certainly connects you with the minds of people in the past who are talking about those things, and it gives you more of a sense of history, I think.
Well, and that's where I would tap into Lysander Spooner, the idea, vices aren't crimes. But the idea here, and I'm going to lift a line from your article here. You talk about libertarianism is about respecting the ability of each person to be the architect of their own life story. Now, that leaves them open to making mistakes, but I like that, again, you're providing an exit, or at least a way to step off or step away from that mistake for a period of time. To me, that seems a lot healthier than just an all-out ban.
I agree.
So where does this go from here? State legislatures, would you like to see it enacted at the lowest possible level, or is this something that needs to be federal?
I think state legislatures are the lowest feasible level. I don't think the federal government has authority to do this, so I would like to see it at the state level.
Okay. Again, we are talking with Simon Laird. He is a Young Voices contributor. And Simon, for people who want to follow your work, or otherwise follow you perhaps on social media, where can they find you?
They can find me at Substack. My Substack newsletter is called Simon Laird's Newsletter. That's Laird is my last name. And I'm also on Twitter at Real Simon Laird.
All right. Hey, it's a pleasure talking with you, and I suspect this is only going to become more relevant as time goes on, this subject.
I'm afraid it will. And great talking to you as well. Thank you.